the idea with Ghost Trance is that it's really it kind of opens a door into this whole universe of his music, and you see kind of get a glimpse of the creative depth and the of what is there. And it quickly became very clear to me that this whole body of work kind of stands as a big elephant in the room, when we talk about experimentalism and experimental music from the past 70 years or so. But then it's so there's so little of it that is mentioned in, I don't know, I was never taught about Braxton. I went to experimental music programs, master dedicated to experimental music or contemporary music. There's a strict separation between, I think, a lot of the discourse around experimental Western art music and experimentalism developed out of African American music and jazz.
You're listening to the NEGOCITO podcast. I'm Jennifer Torrence, and today I will be speaking with the guitarist and scholar Kobe van Cauwenberghe about the music of Anthony Braxton, and in particular his work Ghost Trance Music, which we will be presenting in partnership with the Henny Onsdag Kunstsenter and the Bærum Jazz Festival in November of 2024. That performance will be by the Ictus Ensemble and the Rosas Dance Company, who are traveling in from Brussels, and with Oslo's own Signe Emmelut and Nathalie Abrahamsen Garner. In this episode, Kobe will be telling us a bit about Braxton's background, about his philosophies, and about the systems he's developed to compose music. We'll look closely at ghost trance music and how a musician might approach these scores and interpret them. And we'll also hear about how the Rosas Dance Company developed their choreography for this production and how they dive into their own archives as well as Braxton systems to create this. All the music that you will hear on this episode is ghost trance music, performed by the Ghost Trance Septet and released on NEGOCITO Records.
Anthony Braxton is a composer, a multi-instrumentalist. He's also a theorist, an educator. He's a man of many hats, really. It's quite amazing the scale of the work he produced throughout his career, and he's still going strong. Anthony Braxton was born in Chicago in the 1940s, 1945, and he became in the 1960s one of the first members or first generation members of the AACM. It's a collective of African American composers where they under guidance of Muhal Richard Abrams, they decided to really create sort of their own, narrative of how they wanted to be seen, or their own identity of how they wanted to be seen as composers and creative musicians. And they sort of wanted to step outside this strict binarity of jazz or classical, and they really developed their own musical systems, very much influenced by the latest evolutions in jazz and bebop, but also by a lot of what is known as Western art music or developments in 20th century music, serialism or chance operations or Cajun experimentalism. Out of this collective that Anthony Braxton started developing his own musical systems. He's primarily known as an instrumentalist, as a saxophone player, and he immediately started creating his own compositional systems, really. He really talks about it as one interconnected body of work where elements of improvisation and fixed composition are constantly intertwined from the very beginning, really. I think one of the important historical recordings of Braxton was his first solo album for alto, which historically is the first solo saxophone album recorded, an entire solo album. And even though, yeah, it's often referred to as improvised, all of the pieces on the record really are compositions that he made that are, yeah, part of his so-called solo books. But then he also immediately started writing pieces for his own bandmates in the AACM. They had these weekly gatherings with Muhal Richard Abrams' experimental band where they made their own pieces and then played them, exploring all kinds of, yeah, different instrumental combinations, also different kinds of notation, graphical scores, etc. And so Braxton started writing pieces for orchestra as well, large ensembles, started developing his own quartet that became very famous in the 70s. It was kind of pushed as a new jazz star in the avant-garde jazz in the 1970s. But then at the same kept really writing his very idiosyncratic experimental compositions, leading up to a piece for four orchestras in the end of the 70s that he wrote, which then kind of led to a break with his record label at the time, which was really kind of a jazz record label, Arista Records. And then he sort of, yeah, that was sort of a bridge too far. He was sort of excommunicated by the jazz community, but then at the same time never really recognized by the new music community. But he kept writing his work. It's very well documented, this third part of his career, in an incredible book by Graham Locke, Forces in Motion, which he wrote in the 1980s, which I very much recommend. And then somewhere in the early 1990s, he started teaching at Wesleyan University and started really developing some of the more elaborate compositional systems that he's really still working on until today, and of which Ghost Trance music is the first, and we'll talk about this more in detail. And then while doing, like, kind of really keeping his own path of really developing his own kind of musical ideas and systems, and never really sort of following any kind of, I don't know, set rules or trying to fit into any. It's always been very much in between what is defined as jazz or not, or classical, or it's a little bit everywhere.
And the word is transidiomatic, right? That he self-describes. Can you say more about this? I mean, you're basically describing it, but to hear more.
Yeah, it's this idea that, and I've been thinking about this a lot in how we sort of, also myself, being schooled in contemporary music, how we look at contemporary music or modern music, new music from the last, let's say, 60, 70 years or so. It's very much, I don't know, sort of part of this, it's kind of very strict division between, and kind of determined by a debate around modernism and postmodernism. And it sort of excludes a lot of experimental approaches to music that have been there all along. And I think Braxton's approach is one of them. It's really sort of an experimental music approach that doesn't reject anything. And he says that a lot. My music is not a rejection of anything. And it's this kind of, it's really rooted as much in tradition as it is in this idea of innovation and experimentalism. I mean, he'll famously in interviews often, from in one sentence, quote Stockhausen as important instruments, and then talk about Frankie Lyman or some like pop names or popular music names, and it's all part of the same continuum for him. I guess another important, not so very well known aspect of Braxton is his, well, there are several, but one to mention here is also, since the 1980s, he started writing operas, really a large scale opera cycle, really, called Trillium. There is this, it's not finished yet, but he finished several steps of it. Also here, completely kind of, making his own very idiosyncratic way of using the medium of opera, of storytelling, musical storytelling, and within the large community of large group of people coming together to play it in a very very unique way, and which I think definitely needs to be explored more. They're really amazing pieces. And then lastly, I wanted to mention also, yeah, his work as a writer. He wrote a whole already in the 70s a set of books called the Tri-Axiom Writings, 3 volumes, which are his own, yeah, his musical philosophy really. But it goes further than just musical philosophy. It's really his whole vision of yeah, description of his philosophical ideas that kind of form to him sort of the basis for how he sees, yeah, he thinks about music. And I think the base for understanding his work are somewhere are kind of encapsulated in those writings.
Because what I understand about his philosophy is it's a deeply spiritual, cosmological plane that he's thinking from, and there's a kind of project that we're all moving towards. And I would just love to hear from your voice, what are some of the key aspects of his philosophical thinking, and how does his music practice play into it?
Yeah, it's all about it's exactly what you said, and it's all about this idea of unification, really. I think kind of cosmic unification. I mean, it's not easy to kind of pin it down. Or the one thing maybe I should mention also is having worked a lot on his music, or it's that one aspect of it is that there's no one way to interpret it. It's even in his writing, like his music, is in a way very open-ended, and it's open to how what these are. It's sort of what he says is these are my ideas, but what do you think of it? It's never sort of a one-way kind of knowledge transfer thing of this is how it is. So even in all of these philosophical ideas he proposes, it leaves a lot of space for interpretation. But there are some very like clear tenets, he would call it, or parts that come back, aspects of it that are quite clear. And I think the whole idea of well, the tri-axiom, that the number 3 is very important in his work. He's uh, created his own tricentric foundation, and this tricentric concept, as I understand it, again, it's my understanding of it, but it can be, there are very different ways to approach it. But they're really built on 3 main focuses for me are what he calls stable logics, mutable logics, and synthesis logics. These are sort of 3 elements that often come back, especially maybe not so much in the Triaxiom writings, but in the way he talks about his music in the last, say, 30 years or so. And what this means, the stable logics refers to, as the name sort of suggests, the stable aspects of his music, the fixed scores, so to speak, the written parts. The mutable logics refer to improvisation, anything that's not written, not fixed, that is mutable. And then synthesis logics is that there's always this third element of the unknown. It's what you get when you combine mutable and stable logics. So this is in a very sort of down to earth way what translates into his music also, is the combination. It's always these 3 elements that are there. There's always something fixed, there's something mutable, and there's always has to be space for the unknown, for intuition. That's this synthesis element of it. But it also, to come back to transidiomatic, when he speaks of all these different kind of traditions, or everything can come together, that's also part of these synthesis logics. And what I find really unique in playing his music is that it really invites you to come together with a diverse group of musicians, different musical backgrounds. And that's this whole trans-idiomatic aspect of everyone brings his own element to the music, and it's the synthesis of all these different approaches or interpretations that make the music. So it's this a social aspect to it. That's very important also.
Oh, I really want to get into that when we get to ghost trance music around ritual and all of that. But I think it's the emphasis on the unknown, and also the emphasis on, not rehearsing too much to allow the unknown, to let the nerves create this possibility, I guess, or just to keep that social tension in place, that I find so beautiful about, especially when it's a scored piece where we're often not allowed to let that space be there. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about his this play between composed and improvised. So there's a couple parts there. Maybe it's about the scores, because there's so many different kinds of scores, and ones that are open that require a lot of interpretation anyway. And then there's also free improvisation. Like, how does the system work between, let's say, a fully composed notated piece, just play it, basically, to free improvisation, and how does he mix this together, especially in the later pieces?
Yeah, there's definitely an evolution in his work in that sense. Although even from the beginning, he wrote pieces that are very open-ended, but he did write quite a lot of pieces that look like traditional scores that you can play from beginning to end without necessarily any form of improvisation. It's also about this, what I find really interesting about, and we'll come back to this when we talk about ghost trance music, but especially when he started making those latest compositional systems like ghost trance music, it kind of breaks the whole linearity of a musical performance. So when you see a score, you immediately read it from A to B, from beginning to end, and that's not really there anymore. And that was something I also had to learn when I first started playing some of these pieces, or to kind of really understand. It's kind of really hard to get away from that linearity when you see a written score. You sort of have a tendency to just go through it, but in a ghost trance music piece, that you can, I mean, it starts off usually all together on this primary melody. I mean, I'm already talking about ghost trance, but I'll just explain it briefly. Ghost trance music starts off with consists of a primary melody that the whole group plays together, and then there are exit points on this melody where you can go to follow a symbol of a square, circle, or triangle, and this means that you can insert. If you follow the circle, you can start improvising, move away from the melody. If you follow the triangle, you can insert so-called secondary composition, which are part of the ghost trance piece, but they're in the back of the score, separate from the primary melody. And then square means you can pretty much integrate any piece, part, or excerpt from Braxton's catalog of work into the performance as well. So everybody starts together on this melody, and then drifts apart, and several pieces start to be played simultaneously, and it's this sort of, this whole linearity disappears, and sometimes you go back to the primary melody, but you can go forward, or there's no time direction as in a traditional score. And I think that's where the score and the improvisation and also the synthesis logics really come together. To me, at least, this idea of how he looks at time in a perform or in a score. And then, of course, as we mentioned, the whole social aspect of it. But I guess that's a different part of the performance practice of the piece. But if you really look at just this question of how the score relates to the freedom, the open-endedness of it, is, to me, really seems to be also in how he looks at time in his music. I think an important maybe thing to say about this general philosophy of his music also that I didn't mention before is that he sees it as one holistic entity. So everything is connected. All of his music connects, and the ghost trance music, the primary melody is like it's like a navigational tool to go through his holistic entity, but the path you choose is not set. It's you choose it as a performer, and it's just this. Everything is again unified. Let's say in the same time space or something, and you, as a performer, bring out elements of it, which then become kind of like as if it's a written out score or something. But it's everything sort of exists at the same time. That's sort of the conceptual twist. I don't know if
And
that makes sense.
it definitely does. And I think the time space that he opens up with such a structure that allows for the past and the present and the future to be as one, but also the deep archival practice that's going on there with his own pieces and then all the traditions that he's been relating to across his entire practice. That when I have seen this performance with Ictus and Rosas, I've really felt that feeling of why should it end? Because all this material is constantly living and it will continue to live, but then it has to end, and it's just a beautiful kind of beautiful sadness that it has to end as well. What about the title and the background of this title?
Ghost Trance music, you mean, right? Yeah. So this came from when he started teaching in the beginning of the 1990s at Wesleyan University. At some point, he was sitting in on a class on Native American rituals, and specifically the ghost dance ritual, which apparently was a ritual for a lot of the remaining native tribes in Northern America to connect to their ancestors. So they were long, hour-long ritual circle dances to sort of lift the veil between past and present and to reconnect with their ancestors. And I think that for Braxton was an important kind of conceptual, yeah, a huge inspiration really for him to what you just mentioned about bridging this past, present, and future in his work. The ritual aspect of his music, which he had already been writing about a lot also, and it was sort of the connection for him that made the puzzle complete, so to speak, to start this new compositional system called Ghost Trance music. And it's the trance here also. Yeah, it's there are many. He writes trance with TRANCE, so as a like referring to the, I don't know, trance rituals, etc. Not specifically to Native American practices, but really he explored trance aspects in music worldwide. But then when he writes about it, he also again like writes. There's a lot of play with the word trance, as in trans idiomatic. It's different kind of, so it's TRANS, but or also trans-temporal. He also uses again to speak this aspect of time. And then yeah, so that's the sort of the background story. It really was for him, the developing Ghost Trance music was a system that really kind of put into practice his whole holistic philosophy of connecting his musical past to the present, and really making this toolbox also, he describes it, to the performers to explore his work, to navigate his holistic system. So he had been doing that himself with his quartets in the 1980s already, with what he called collage music, combining different compositions, playing different pieces together. But Ghost Trance music was really the first system he developed to do this. And yeah, there was sort of a shift in his career. He stopped playing with his quartets and was only doing Ghost Trance music, which at the very early stages was really, really quite radical. If you listen to the first recordings of Ghost Trance music in the 1990s, they're extremely repetitive. They don't really drift away from the primary melody. They just go on for almost an hour in playing this sort of ongoing that rhythm of the primary melody. And then he starts developing this primary melody also. He starts in using kind of rhythmical variations So there are different stages in the Ghost Trance music cycle, if you want, where or he calls them species of Ghost Trance music. I think the one we played with Ictus when you saw it was a third species Ghost Trance music, which has a more rhythmical interruptions and even sometimes graphical elements in the scores. Or so there's quite a bit of variety in those pieces as well.
Yeah, what I remember from that performance where it was 4 points, 4 corners of a square where musicians were stationed, and then in the center, or basically in the center, the dancers were. And I just remember seeing you like calling up scores, and I thought, how does it work? How does it work? I don't get how it works. What does this symbol mean? And I really love that as a listener, that I always have that. How does it work? But then just having to give up because there's a system here that I won't ever understand. Maybe we should hear more about this system that he's developed for Ghost Trance music.
Well, from a practical sense, like you said, how does it work? I mean, and I have to say here that I don't feel like I really understand everything, and it's also not the goal of really finding, but it's really all about kind of finding your way into it and how you want to express yourself through this music. So the way it usually works is that you can subdivide. So you have a group of people, let's say we were 6 musicians, and then you subdivide the group into subgroups. And then we assigned these subgroups, you kind of assign different compositions. So you make a pre-selection of compositions, tertiary and secondary compositions that you want to insert in the performance, and then you assign it the different subgroups, and the subgroups have their own section leader or just decide on their own when they use this material. And so in general, my role with this group, and also when I played it before, I kind of gave the beginning cue and the end cue, and then in between, maybe sometimes I gave up a page number which would then indicate the primary melody where I would start, and then if people wanted to join me to come back to the primary melody, that would be possible. Anyone at any moment can cue another player to do something, and that's what's really nice, especially with improvisation. And some of the cues you sometimes also see are numbers that are given like this, which refer to language music. And I haven't talked about language music before, but it's an integral part of it, and it's basically his system for improvisation, which is it's a list of 12 sound parameters. And for example, language music 1 is long sounds. And if you cue number 1 to another player, or you start improvising with long sounds, for example. And then cueing, let's say, a secondary composition, we use, those are numbered. They're in the back of the Ghost Trance music score from 1 to 4. So if you want to cue your subgroup to play, let's say, second composition number 2, you give a sideways cue of number 2. And so not to confuse with the numbers of language music. And then the tertiary pieces, you either just sort of flip a score around or something, or just try to catch someone else's attention, let's do this. Or sometimes when we play it a lot, we recognize if somebody starts playing a line. Yeah, so those are all the possibilities that we have. What we decide in advance basically is the repertoire of tertiary and secondary pieces that we want to add. But the moments when they will be added are left open. And yeah, that's pretty much then kind of how it works. You start playing and see where you end up throughout the piece. It's this constant, yeah, navigation. Really, is what Braxton also calls it, navigating the material. Braxton calls it navigation through form. It's something he often says about how to perform his music, which I think describes it pretty well.
And then there are the Rosas dancers and their material.
I had already been playing a bit of, for a few years, Ghost Trance music when I did a workshop with students from Ictus Ensemble, and we presented something after the workshop. This was 2 or 3 years ago. And then there were some dancers from Rosas there as well, Michael Pomero and Marie Goudot. And out of this, they were really intrigued by the Braxton's concept and the music. And out of this came, yeah, sort of an idea to explore how this would work with dancers as well. And I mean, it was really amazing to see how both Michael and Marie, we had a meeting and I explained the whole system to them, and they then from their side really went really deep in exploring the music and sort of finding ways to translate this Braxton's philosophy or find connections to the dance, to choreography. And from their side, so there are two dancers from the Rosas Dance Company in Brussels, which is the company of choreographer Anne-Theresa de Keersmaker. And Marie and Michael were sort of assigned with the task of making what they call the Rosas toolbox, of kind of making a dynamic archive of the vocabulary repertoire of the Keersmaker, of the projects they've done over the past 40 years or so. And so they had kind of explored all the kind of movement categories, and in a very systematic way, how they described what the choreographic vocabulary of Rosas was, sort of collected all the different procedures, and it was really amazing to see the way they described the categories and the parallels with Braxton's own way of categorizing sound, like the language music, different parameters for improvising. And it's on a formal level, it was really amazing, the connection between both worlds. Aesthetically, there are a lot of differences, but it was immediately clear to us that there was a lot of ground to collaborate, to connect. And so Michael and Marie made together with, there were 4 dancers, together with Mark Lormer and Sophia Dinkel, they started exploring different ways of how to kind of create their own, not necessarily from the beginning, it was clear they didn't want to make a response to the music, like making a dance to the music, but making a system where the dance and the music are in the same event space, are really in the same on the same level as so it would be 6 musicians and 4 dancers, so 10 performers really on stage. They created their own what they call Braxton phrases in response to the primary melody, where they had fixed positions or positions on the scene, which they then placed they have their own sort of movement procedures. This one was called the magic square. It's like a square with numbers. It's an old spatial procedure. Well, no, it's like a numerical procedure, but they use it to where you follow a certain set of numbers within a square, and then you kind of place a certain movement in a space, and you can play around with it and shift it. And so this was their primary melody in a way, or their Braxton phrase. And I have to mention here also that the positions they used were kind of, and now it's turning back to Braxton. I hope it's not getting too complicated, but Braxton really himself made sort of a prototype of a system involving dancers, which is called Pinetop Aerial Music. This was, I think, 2009 or 2010. They only did one performance of it, and he made all these drawings of positions for the dancers to take, which they have to follow. It's like 36 positions, and then the musicians are also walking around with the dancers, and there's a singer who is singing Ghost Trance music. So it's connected to Ghost Trance music, but it's some of the Ghost Trance, there's like a subset of Ghost Trance which has a vocal line in it. Braxton calls it syntactical Ghost Trance music. So these lines are sung by the singer, and then the dancers and the musicians move around according. They have to follow a certain set of rules. There's some graphic scores, and anyway, I didn't have all the details of the system, but I had the different Braxton's drawings of the dancers' positions, and I gave it to the Rosas dancers as well. So they took this as basic material for to make their own dance material. And then they added other layers. They also translated some of the language music sound parameters into movement parameters, following their own Rosas toolbox. So that they could also insert improvisational tasks. Yeah, they also had video monitors on the side of the stage, which were playing kind of in loop choreographies from the Rosas repertoire, which they could use as sort of a video score to insert as, you know, a tertiary composition, insert this material into the piece as well at any given moment.
Many thanks to Kobe van Cauwenberghe, and thanks for listening.